Good day and welcome to today's webinar, Synchronizing with HPE ALM for Traceability Across Toolsets. Today's webinar is brought to you by Vivit's Software Lifecycle Management, SIG, Special Interest Group, and it's moderated by myself, Jeff Downs. I am a solutions architect currently at Tasktop Technology. I've been there for going on 4 years, and I work with a lot of our customers as they're connecting their tool suites, in a lot of cases centering around HPE, ALM, and other HPE tools. Before this, I was actually in a QA organization for about 10 years and served in a variety of different roles, but the last 5 or 6 years in that particular role, I served as an HP ALM administrator, as well as a lot of the other tools that we used and utilized across the testing team. The Vivit Software Lifecycle Integration SIG is a virtual community of software practitioners and managers who discuss how to create tool infrastructure and processes that increase the collaboration and interaction among the members of the software development and delivery teams. This group focuses on seamlessly connecting with our HPE tools with third-party tools that inevitably exist in our ecosystems. We share our stories, both good and bad. We share ideas and work together to eliminate a long-standing pain point in the software development lifecycle. And we've provided a link to the Software Lifecycle Integration SIG here on the screen, so please do join the group if you are not currently a member. Today's presenter is Mark Ford. Mark is a lead developer at TIAA. In Mark's role at TIAA, he's also an HP ALM and Quality Center administrator. He's actually served in that role for much longer than I did. He's been doing that role for 10 plus years. He's also a Tasktop admin and has been serving in that role for 4 years. Mark supports about 6 different Tasktop synchronizations in production today between a variety of different tool sets. He's a programmer at heart, and his specialties include developing processes, tools, and utilities that augment and enhance the tool sets that he supports. Many of you may have come across Mark or heard of Mark in various other Vivit events and locations because he's the Vivit local user group leader in the Carolinas, and he's also one of our board of directors. Before we get started, I've got a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's live session is intended for all Vivit members. The recording will be posted in the webinar section on the Vivit website and visible for all members. Additionally, today's slide deck and webinar recording will be made available to you. We'll send you the link via email once they are posted to the Vivit website. To enlarge the presentation pane on your screen, just click on the rectangle in the upper right corner of the presentation being pointed to by the red arrow. And finally, if you have questions as we go along, please type and send them in using the Q&A pane on the left side of your screen. Simply type in your question and then click on the Ask button. To ask a question and receive them in your native language, click on the flag in the upper left corner of your screen, which will launch a language selector box. Next, click on the radio button next to your language and then click Apply and you're all set. So without further ado, let's get started and I will pass it over to Mark.
All right. Well, thank you, Jeff. Go ahead and advance the slide. So hello, everyone, and hey, welcome to the webinar. I am really glad that you could take some time out of your busy schedule today to join us and to learn a little bit about a couple of tool synchronizations that I've built. So welcome to everyone. As Jeff said, I've been a QCLM admin for over 10 years, and I've been a Tasktop Sync admin for about 4 years now. And in that time, I've done some really interesting tool syncs. And today I'm just going to talk about one, or I guess it's actually 2, different tool syncs that I think are really interesting. They really tell a nice story about how we sync 2 different items between 2 different tools, and we connect them in such a way that it links back up for a really nice round-trip story. It's one of those syncs that I think looks really cool on paper, and I just wanted to share some of that information here with you today. So sit back, relax, and hopefully you find something really useful in the presentation. So I've got about 30 minutes or so of slides that I'll be covering, and then definitely plan to leave some time at the end for your questions. And so definitely queue those up as I'm going along, and you think of a question, just type that in so you don't forget. If you've got any comments you want to make, definitely do that as we go. Make use of that question pane. And then at the end, we'll kind of go through those, and we'll hit as many as we can. Hopefully we'll get to all of them. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to it. All right, so for my agenda, I'm going to start off with a little bit of a background on some of the challenges that are really inherent with multiple tool sets, especially from multiple vendors in an organization. So I'm sure many of us are in that situation of being with an organization that's got multiple tools, most likely from multiple vendors. And maybe you've been thinking, or maybe this will kind of trigger some thought processes on, hey, if we could connect these tools together and start sharing information between the tools, wow, we could really get some great benefits. So I'll be showing you some benefits that we get, and yeah, and hopefully that'll trigger some thoughts in your organization as well. So once I've covered some of that setting the stage, I'll move into the specific tool sync that I'm going to be talking about today. And I will definitely cover the need that our users had, so give you a little bit of background on that. And I'll cover the design approach that we came up with. How did we design it? I'll discuss a little bit about the implementation, give you a little bit of just a little bit of touch of how we implemented it, a little bit of code example as well. So if you're a little more technically inclined, you can pay attention to that. And then definitely if you've got some questions on our implementation, I'll be happy to cover that as well at the end. And then I'll also, towards the end of the presentation there, of course, touch on some of those key benefits that we hope to realize with this solution and some of the benefits that we've seen already. All right, so first I want to set the stage. As I mentioned, I'm sure you're no stranger to having multiple tool sets in your organization. That's pretty common across the landscape. And as we know, there's a few vendors that really have large suites of tools, and they cover most, if not all, needs. And of course, there's always that myriad of smaller vendors with a lot of different point solutions. So you've got your QA tool, I'm sure you've got a dev tool, and most likely another dev tool, and quite possibly more than 2 dev tools, because as we know from our developers, they tell us all the time that, hey, you can never have enough dev tools, right? So you've got all those, you've got your release management tools, you've got your change management tool, you've got your service management tool, right? The list goes on, all these tools. And there could be a variety of reasons why you might have tools from different vendors. Maybe you're looking at best of breed. You want the best tool for each situation, and you don't really care if they come from different vendors. You just want the best of each. Or maybe you've even acquired other businesses along the way, and you've inherited tools. And as we know, you can't inherit these tools and tell these folks that you've acquired, hey, day one, you got to use a different tool. We know that just doesn't work, right? That just creates too much chaos. You can't do that. So you might be supporting other tools because of that. Or maybe you're working with a vendor and there's a need that they just can't meet. So you've had to go out and get some tools from another vendor. So for whatever reason, it's bound to happen. You're going to end up with lots of different tools. And that could be a good thing, right? I mean, at first, everybody likes working in the tool that works best for them. Everybody likes using that tool that they need, and everyone's happy, and that makes management happy. So things are going along great, but then, of course, as we also know, we don't work on islands, right? QA doesn't work all by itself. Dev doesn't work. Release, change, service management. People need to communicate. And as we know, human beings are wonderful at communication, but we also are prone to other things like distractions and other issues that come up, right? So in some ways, we're not always the best at being maybe reliable with our communication. And so communication doesn't occur, and people can get confused, and of course deadlines start slipping, and then, before you know it, management is not very happy. Things aren't going well. So what can we do about that? Well, one thing to do is to start synchronizing. And some of the tools out there provide their own sync mechanisms that can talk to other tools in that vendor, and even sometimes other tools from other vendors. So you may already have some opportunities there with some of your tools being able to synchronize those together. And there's, of course, other options as well. You can bring in an independent kind of what I call a sync engine, or I know other folks in the industry might call that a hub. But there's, it has lots of endpoints. So you can bring in one kind of generic type sync solution that has lots of endpoints and can connect to lots of different tools. And then you can start doing a lot of different tool intercommunications. And, I mean, let's face it, when the tools start talking with each other, they can do a much better job than we can, right? Then now communication's streamlined, everyone's in the know, users are automatically seeing their information from other tools in their tool of choice. So they're not having to go, oh, I got to go get an account in this other tool, I got to log into this tool, I'm not familiar with this tool, I'm not comfortable with the tool, maybe I don't even like that tool. Now they don't have to log into that. They can stay in their tool and they can see the information that they need to see right there, and it just keeps them up to date, and everyone's happy, and that makes management happy. And the great thing about these tool synchronizations is they're automated, right? So they're going to be out there faithfully 24/7. They're going to be doing the communications on time every time. They're not going to get distracted. They're not going to get interrupted by a work issue. They're not going to have to leave early because someone's sick and miss a communication. They're not going to do that. They're going to be doing their job, I guess, unless a server goes down, of course, so maybe they're not completely prone to failure. But for the most part, yeah, tool communications are going to be very reliable, and that's going to work wonders. All right, so I've covered some of the stage. Now let's dive down into a very specific tool sync that our business users needed, and I'll, of course, go through and show you the design and the different implementation pieces. All right, so I'll cover just a little bit of background on our specific tool sync. So in 2013, we saw a need to start synchronizing defects, and at that time, we were using HP Quality Center and for our QA organization, and our developers were using Rational Team Concert, RTC. So, and we recognized right away there's a need. Okay, you've got defects, QA is reporting defects, Dev needs to see those defects, Dev doesn't want to have to log into Quality Center, maybe we don't want to give them licenses to log into Quality Center, maybe licenses are an issue. We want them to see that same defect in RTC. So we went and looked at all of our available solutions back in the day, and Tasktop Sync kind of came out as one of the best solutions that we could find at the time. So we brought in Tasktop, and they've got a product that they're calling Sync, at least at that point. And yeah, we brought that in, and that really enabled those developers to see those same defects. So that was great. We could set up those defects so they could sync bidirectionally. So QA could update the status, Dev could update the status, they could update comments, add attachments, all that type of information, update fields, all that would synchronize back and forth so everybody was on the same page. And that was working really great, and we were really pleased with that. One issue that did kind of come out of that, or maybe not an issue, but I guess a suggestion for improvement, was the desire to have those, when those defects show up in RTC, they weren't getting linked to anything. So they were kind of getting created out there, and then maybe there's a little communication gap of, hey, how do I know that I've got that defect out there? So they said, boy, if you could create that defect in RTC, from that QA defect in ALM and link that to a user story, wow, that would be great. Then I would have that visibility into that defect. All right, so we kind of put that on the back burner, and then fast forward a few years, and we've now upgraded to HPE ALM. And it's 2016. We've had our defect synchronization running. It's been kind of our bread and butter sync all this time. And then in 2016, we were asked by another team, hey, how can we start doing some traceability? So we're using RTC. We're creating these user stories in RTC. But how can we get traceability to ALM test cases? Our QA org's adding these test cases in ALM, but our user stories in RTC, well, we can't really link them, okay? There's two different tools from two different vendors, so what kind of options do we have there? So we said, hey, we're using Tasktop Sync to do defect synchronization. Why not take those RTC user stories and synchronize those into ALM as ALM requirements? So ALM as a tool, it has a requirement module that you can use to put your requirements, and you can link those requirements to test cases. So it's kind of a natural progression then to say, let's take those RTC user stories, put them in ALM as requirements, and then you can link the ALM requirements to those test cases. And then you can see that linkage information and that test case coverage back into RTC, which I'll show you here in a little bit. Well, in this team that wanted to do this particular user story to test case traceability was also already doing the defect synchronization from ALM back to Rational Team Concert. So we realized we could further improve upon this entire solution and kind of combine these two syncs so that we could, as that user story creates the ALM requirement, we could pass that story ID in. We could pass that user story ID from the ALM requirement down to the test cases, to the test execution, and to a defect that gets created from that test execution of that test case covered by that ALM requirement, sync to the RTC user story. And by passing that story ID down through the chain, when that defect gets created from in RTC from the ALM defect, then we could automatically link that RTC defect right back to that original user story. So that kind of creates that full round-trip process that really just was a kind of a wow moment of, hey, this is really cool. This is going to be some value, and it's going to give them that traceability value. It's going to give them that defect linking right back to the user story value. So that was really pretty cool, and we were excited to get that implemented, and our users were excited also to have that available. All right, so let's talk a little bit about a little more specifically, I guess, on the implementation. So I've got some screenshots, and these are from our test environment. Just that way I could have some real generic info. So a lot of this, the actual info isn't too exciting and is actually pretty repetitive, but you can get some ideas perhaps of how we set this up. And of course, you may have different fields than we have that you would want to sync back between RTC and ALM. With the sync, you can do all kinds of things. You can sync whatever field, as many fields as you want, whatever provides value in your organization. So when we set this up, we set it up so that we could do the RTC user stories, and they would sync, so they originate in RTC, and they get created then in ALM as ALM requirements. And we set up a single folder in HPALM in the requirement module for these initial user story syncs to show up in. And we also designed it so that once those requirements are in ALM, they can be moved to other ALM requirement folders, and that won't break the sync process. So we set up our queries such that it would recognize that, hey, this it's a syncing artifact, so even if that's moved to a different folder, we're still going to be able to sync that. And that's pretty a crucial item so that they could move these around to different requirement folders on the QA side that would seem to make sense to them. And we also did, in ALM, we created a specific requirement type called an RTC story. So in ALM, of course, you can create different requirement types. And we wanted to create one specifically for this implementation so that we could have complete control over those ALM fields. We could have just the fields that we wanted and nothing extra. We could also control the being able to read and write in the field. So we could say we want information to come from RTC, and we want it to be able to show up in ALM, but we don't want people to change that information in ALM. So we can make it a read-only field, and then they know, hey, I can't change this information, it's read-only. And then we could, of course, allow them to modify any information that they would need. And then, of course, that user story ID, that we definitely bring down from the RTC user story into ALM on that ALM field. And we added an ALM synchronization tab, kind of a new little tab there in the RTC user story, so that we could bring that information from ALM back into RTC. Let me change. Okay, so then now that the requirement is in ALM, you can, of course, trace ALM test plans to ALM requirements. And we bring that story ID right from the requirement down into that test case at the time that it is set to be covered by that requirement. And of course, you could have multiple tests cover, or you could have, I guess I should say, you could have a single test cover multiple requirements, right? One test might cover 3 or 4 different requirements. And in that case, it just concatenates those story IDs in that test for each of those requirements that that test covers. And we can also pull back information from the test into the requirement, things like application. So when we create a test, we have the tester indicate what application is being tested. We can pull that right back into the into the ALM requirement, and then of course everything we have in the ALM requirement can flow right back into that RTC user story. So in RTC, you can see what applications are being tested from the ALM test. And of course, in your organization, whatever information you would need to pull back. And then as the test executions occur in ALM, that test execution status gets ALM automatically populates the test case or the test coverage status field, and it's a little bit blurry on these screenshots, but it's kind of the upper one there in the upper left box that I've called out there with the little red box. But ALM automatically aggregates the test execution coverage and summary, and it puts that into a single field in the ALM requirement, and then that's just a text field. It's real easy to bring back right into that RTC user story. So now in RTC, you can see whether your user stories are covered by test cases or not, and if they are covered, then how's the test execution going? Has it even started yet? If it has any test failed that this user story is connected to? Is everything passed and we're good? Suddenly you get all that information back in RTC, and that is just so helpful. And then, of course, during your test execution, as we all know, sometimes it happens, you get that occasional defect. And when you create that defect from the test execution, then ALM automatically provides some linkage from that test to that defect. And then we can bring that story ID, or in this case, story IDs, if you've got multiple, right down into that ALM defect. And then once they're in the defect, you can then, of course, in our case, maybe this is a defect that's syncing back to RTC. They can set the fields to say, yep, go ahead and sync this in. And then when that is set, then the defect is created in RTC. And of course, there again, we can specify, we created our own work item type in RTC so that we would have complete control over the fields in RTC and what fields users can modify and which ones they can't. And then allow those fields to do that sync bidirectionally so that the developers in RTC can see the information that they need. And then, of course, since we've carried that story ID through the whole chain, now that RTC defect can be automatically linked right back to that original story. So there's that whole sequence of events and that complete round trip, which is really, really, I think, just kind of a neat story. So I'll discuss a little bit of the specifics, and I didn't want to go in too deep with all the fields and everything, because you're going to have your own fields, and so some of that's not super practical. But as I did mention, we use Tasktop for both of these synchronizations. We use that for our original Defects sync, and we're now using that for our user story to ALM sync. And with any of these kind of synchronization tools, they're pretty similar, where you define your endpoints, you set up your mapping, you can map from field to field, and you can do any translation that you need. I know one of the things that I really like about Tasktop is that we can use custom Groovy scripting. So Groovy is actually a language, if you didn't catch that reference. I didn't know that before I started working with it. But it's a scripting language, and you can get really granular with how you do some of the translation between the fields. So in some cases, I've got fields where I'm combining two different fields in one tool, and I'm combining them and putting them into a single field in another tool. Or maybe I'm looking at the ALM comment field, and if there's too many comments, I'm just taking the last few comments and chopping off the top so that it'll fit into another tool's maybe more limited size comment box. Just all kinds of things. And if you get into a situation where, hey, I really need to do something very specific, you can do it with that tool. And of course, there's other tools out there on the market that you can do synchronizations with, and Tasktop's one I'm most familiar with. But definitely look at your options and do compare and see what's out there, because there are lots. And as I mentioned, each vendor has some of their own kind of smaller tool syncs. I know ALM has its ALM synchronizer, and we've looked at that, and we're maybe starting to use some of that in some certain cases as well. Yeah, and so then in the workflow, so on the HP ALM side, you definitely need to get into doing some workflow coding in order to move that story ID through the different modules. And especially with this kind of implementation, you need to keep in mind that requirements can be traced to test cases from the requirements module, and it can also be done from the test plan module. So that was one thing that I had as a developer. You need to think of all the different ways that an end user can do these actions and make sure you catch them all. So you have to not only trigger off of that traceability workflow trigger in the requirement module, but you got to make sure you trigger off of that from the test plan module, because they're different ALM workflow triggers. And so you receive those triggers, and then you can set up code that can just copy the information from one field to another every time that workflow event gets triggered. And then again from the test to the test execution to when you create a defect, and you're copying information from that test and that test instance into the defect. And some of this I'd already set up ahead of time, being able to copy fields from one item to another in ALM. And I always like to do it in a generic way if possible. So if you know you need to copy one field, don't just limit your solution to copying that single field. Consider setting up your workflow event so that it copies all same name fields. So you go through and you read the list of fields in the requirement module, for instance, and the test plan module, and then it copies information from all of the same name fields. And in that case, that worked great for us, because any field we named the same in multiple modules, we wanted automatically brought down. And then as you add additional fields, and they're named the same, you don't even have to update your workflow code. It's already going out there and scanning. So especially, this is just a little tip for your ALM workflow. Whenever you can set up things a little more generic, a little more to handle future cases, so much the better. Then you're not having to go in there and tweak your workflow code as much, which is definitely a plus. All right, so a few of the benefits that our users had hoped to see, and they're definitely starting to see now that we've got this into production. And most of these deal with that traceability, so that just having that automated traceability across really a broad range of development and testing tasks. So you might have even other tools that you could pull into the mix, and we're starting to see that here. I probably won't be that long before we're bringing in Jira and other types of items into this same type of synchronization of our data. Improving that project quality, and again, inheriting that traceability. So that traceability from the user story to the covered test case. How important is that? You write these user stories, you write the test cases, well, you need some kind of traceability. You need to know how well these user stories or these requirements are being covered. If you've got coverage gaps, you need to know. Otherwise, you might not be testing some of this functionality, or you might be over-testing. It's once you start doing that traceability, you can it's really an eye-opener into the quality that you could be producing here. So, and it just helps so much. And then, of course, the defects from those requirements. So they were really excited to get that linkage back on the defects side back to that RTC user story, so that they could get that easy identification and and just that monitoring across the life cycle. Lots of benefits. So this was a particularly exciting one. I've had other ones that I've been real excited with, but this was definitely one that once we got into it, it was like, wow, this is cool stuff. So I give us an award definitely for our sync, and I've shared that with Tasktop and even with the CEO. I was talking with him at one of the HP Discoveries, and he's like, wow, this is cool. This is really good stuff. It's neat to see what customers are doing. So, and I think especially with Vivid, and it's just great to see. We hear things from vendors, and they show us how we can use the tool. But it's really neat when you can hear from a customer, an end user, and they say, here's how we're actually using the tool. So that's cool. And hopefully you got some good information from that today. I did want to just touch a little bit in general on our different syncs that we have. So with our original sync solution that we've had out there for the past 3-4 years, we're running that on one sync template. So in Tasktop Sync and maybe in other tools as well, you can kind of set up a mapping template. And we just have one template because we have all of our different ALM projects all on one template. And of course, the more you can make your ALM projects and your projects from your other tools have a common workflow, the better. I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but the more you can make that common, it saves you so much time and effort in the long run. And we have to really fight some battles here in order to keep our ALM projects uniform, so that we're not doing one-off types of field modifications, and then now downstream, these projects have these fields, these don't. We want to synchronize into another tool, but how do we handle all? It's just, if you can keep everything the same, it's so much nicer. And I know not everybody has that luxury, but if you can, definitely worth moving to. But we think between 5 different ALM projects and 40 different RTC project areas. So obviously we do a lot of project areas, RTC project areas, into just most of them go into one really large ALM project, and we've got some other smaller ones. But we're doing 9,000 syncs a month on average. And we've got, the other nice thing about these tool syncs, you can have them going every minute or every 5 minutes, depending on what kind of performance you want to see. So we've got ours set to every minute. So once these defects, once these user stories hit and they're ready for sync, within a minute, they're showing up in the other tool. So it's not like you have to wait for some kind of batch job overnight or anything. It's pretty close to real time, which is just amazing. And then some of our other syncs that I've set up here, we're doing requirements from RD&G into HPALM. Again, very similar to this one, where they wanted their requirements in that RD&G tool. They wanted those they want to be able to trace those to the ALM test cases. So set up a sync there. We're doing ServiceNow problem tickets into a couple different tools. People wanted to see that ServiceNow problem, and we've got other cases where they want to see incidents in tools. And again, it makes it so much easier when you have a way to synchronize this data. ALM Jira, that's something that's real hot and heavy now that we're working on. We're probably going to have that in production here in a couple months. Serena Business Manager, ServiceNow, they wanted to see deployment task information into their change records. And just the sky's the limit once you start working on these synchronizations, and it just kind of feeds from there. So we run this across 2 different production sync servers. We've got 6 different sync instances. So we run 3 per server. So if you're familiar with Tasktop Sync, you can set up different instances on a separate Tasktop server, and we kind of load balance it there. We've got our 2 heaviest hitting ones split between 2 different servers, and then we've got some smaller ones on the others. But all these other sync solutions, we see an additional thousands more syncs per month. So at first it was kind of slow, and as it gets going, boy, it really gets going. And we see those sync servers are very active. They stay very active during the week. So great stuff. So that is the end of my presentation. So we're going to go ahead and move into, I think Jeff's got a little polling question, and then we'll start diving into some of the questions.
Yeah, great stuff, Mark. Thanks so much. I was really glad to see the slide that you had there about the HPE ALM workflow. That's one thing that I come across a lot, is that when people start to think about integrating their tools, they're just looking at that integration tool that sits in the middle and what that tool is capable of. But you really need to step back and look at the bigger picture and figure out how these 3, 4, 5, 6 tools can all work together. I think that's a great example. Another example that I see quite a bit is the alerting functionality in HPE ALM. A lot of times that doesn't get turned on because people aren't managing their requirements in ALM. So once you set up that synchronization and you get those requirements into ALM, now you've got more functionality in your ALM environment that you can start taking advantage of.
Yep, definitely. Good points, yes.
So I think we're going to put a poll up on the screen as we're getting some additional questions coming in. If you could go ahead and respond to this poll, that would be great. Really what I'm looking to understand as the SIG leader is how you want your future content delivered. Are you looking for more webinars like the ones we had today? Are you looking for webinars that also have live demos? Blogs, HPE conference roundtable type discussions, or if you have any other suggestions, definitely let us know in the survey comments.
Okay, we'll give you guys just a little bit of time. I'm kind of skimming through the questions here that we have. Okay, yeah, I see some good questions here.
All right, it looks like the voting is just about wrapping up, and webinars with live demos appears to have won in a landslide. So that's good information, and we'll definitely take that into account for any future webinars that we're going to do. So we do have a handful of questions here for you, Mark. Let me go ahead and find something for you here. How long did it take, and how many people worked on the implementation of the Sync project?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, what's the cost in terms of setup for some of these? And that's because obviously you want to do kind of a cost benefit of, well, is it better to just have people do the communication, or do we want to take some time out and invest in a solution? Are we going to see the payback? And yeah, that's good. I would say, and it varies obviously with syncs and organizations, but right here I am our Tasktop Sync admin, so I do all of the sync setup, and then my manager kind of helps with some of the project management pieces, and then we've had various end users. So we probably had maybe 6 or 7 folks, including that's maybe 2 on my team, and then from the business area, yeah, we had like maybe 4 or 5 folks. And you bring in the people involved with the head QA people and the head development people. You bring them in, and they bring a few folks in. And then we did set this up in a test environment. And I guess we started this back in, I want to say the November time frame. So yeah, we started around November, and we set up a kind of a proof of concept in our test environment, and that we did some demos, and then we moved that to our UAT environment once we had everything the way we wanted. And then we had some QA folks go in and just start playing around with it. So we said, hey, take your developers. We gave them separate RTC project area, gave them a separate ALM test environment, and said, just go create some user stories, have those replicate over into ALM as requirements, and just walk through the process and find out if there's anything we missed or anything we need to make sure we cover during training. So we did that pretty much through kind of end of December into January, and then we implemented here in February. So it took about, maybe 3 months. It could have been a little shorter. Anytime you're running to the end of the year and all the holidays and everything, and things kind of, you can lose weeks of time there. So, yeah, but I would say a really in-depth think is going to it could take a couple of months, especially when you've got multiple people. And as we know, the more people you have, the longer it can take to bring them in together into meetings. So, but yeah, and it can vary, of course.
Thanks. Next question, have you synced any tools between different network domains? So as an example, you're running your HPE in the cloud and you've got your RTC internally.
We have not to this point. All of our tools are installed locally, but we have been asked here within the past month to look at synchronizing with other Jira installations in the cloud. So we've got some areas of our company that work with vendors that use, like Jira, for instance. And so they're saying, boy, it'd be really nice if our folks here could create Jira defects in their system, but they don't want to necessarily give us access to their system. So they're saying, hey, since we have Jira here, could they create the defects in Jira in our environment, and then we could synchronize those Jira defects from our environment to their remote environment. So, and as I understand, that's definitely feasible and possible, and we're just starting to do that, but we haven't gotten too far into that one yet.
All right. Next question. The question is, can you control when requirements are synced versus when test cases or defects are synchronized? I know you mentioned the interval that you're running approximately every 1 minute. Do you have everything going at that same interval? Do you split those out?
Yeah. So, and I guess was the question if you can limit the specific work items, or was it more on the interval, or both, maybe? Yeah,
I think it's both. So can you control when those are synchronized and do it by type? So you might want defects going more near real time, but the requirements aren't changing as frequently, and you want those to synchronize hourly or something like that.
Yeah, if you set up different instances, or at least that's kind of what Sync calls them. I think like ALM Synchronizer calls them links, something like that. I mean, if you set up different ones, and we definitely did. We've got each of these different type of tool synchronizations is set up separate, and so we can definitely control. And it's kind of a key thing too. We had ours set to, I think, every, I want to say 15 seconds on our defect sync, because in the early days we didn't have a whole lot of activity, and we really wanted to, when we first implemented our defect sync, we wanted it to be real time. We didn't want there to be any of that lag time. So we had it set to like 15 seconds. And then, and that ran fine for a few years, but as activities picked up and we've added more project areas and we've seen some kind of performance issues on our sync server, so we could just go and slide those around. And so I said, yeah, our requirement one, we only need every 5 minutes. But our defect one, we want every 1 minute. And you can kind of balance that out, spread that out a little bit, and that helped a lot.
And I just got a clarification here. It looks like they're wondering more about only wanting to synchronize the requirements when the testers are ready.
Yeah. So
not getting all those requirements immediately.
Yeah, exactly, and that's definitely how we set this particular user story sync up. So when in the initial stages we said, well, how do we want to indicate that this user story is ready to sync? Because obviously they might create them, they might not progress on them, or they just might not be ready. So and with these sync tools, you can usually provide some kind of query or filter. I know with Tasktop Sync, you can actually set up queries in RTC to say when the artifacts meet this set of requirements, then they can sync. And so we went based on a status transition. So we said when it transitions to this status, that is the flag that we're going to use to say it is ready to go and synchronize into ALM. And so we set up that RTC query, and that works great. Or maybe you want to just have a field. You could do a simple field that says sync, yes, no. And as soon as they set that to yes, then it starts syncing. So yeah, definitely something you want to think about early on because, you don't want to get down the road and turn on your sync, and all of a sudden you've got 2,000 items in ALM that you didn't even think that you don't even want in there, and that just creates a lot of confusion. So yeah, definitely plan and prepare for that.
All right. Got a couple of questions here about, well, this will be a real quick one, what version of ALM you're using.
Yeah, we're on the latest. We're on the ALM 12.5.3.
All right. And then, let me see. It looks like there's a couple questions here in regard to when you first set up the user story or the requirement synchronization, or really any of your synchronizations for that matter. How did you kind of initialize between the two systems? So a lot of times you'll have all of your user stories are in RTC because that's where they've been tracked from the beginning. So did you start by doing that initial synchronization of everything, or did you start with new user stories from this day forward and bring those across?
Yeah, we started with all of the, since we went based on a transition status, we went with every user story that was in that transition status. And I think we had like 170 or so that were in that transition status the day that we implemented the sync, and I kind of babied that along. When I set it up, I did them in chunks so that but I think Tasktop Sync can handle them all, and ALM could handle them all, but I kind of like to just do a few at a time. But yeah, we brought all 170 in and brought them in as requirements, but I mean it's kind of up to you too. You could set different criteria on how you want it, but yeah.
Okay, and we still have a whole bunch of questions here in the queue, but I think what we'll do is go ahead and wrap up there, and then we can follow up. And actually, I'll work with the folks at Vivid with how we want to follow up with any of the unanswered questions at this point, and try to either share some of those out through the SIG website and maybe a blog or something, but definitely get responses back to the individuals that ask them. And with that, I think thank you for attending the webinar, and just a reminder that once we've made the recording and the slides available on the Vivid website, all of the attendees today will get the link to those emailed out to them. Thank you.